Hello, 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 and welcome back to Bold Strokes Books Bookathon. Thank you so much for tuning in today and Friday and Saturday. If you've been with us for the whole thing, we love our readers. This panel is called Out of This World. All things fantasy, paranormal, space opera, anything that is not of this world, which sounds like a really nice break from reality right now.
Yeah, really.
So just two quick things about Zoom if you don't know. The gallery view at the top right-hand corner of your screen, that is the best way to see all our panelists. At the bottom middle of your screen, there is a Q&A box. That's where your questions will go. There's also a chat room where you can post your comments and your commentary, but any questions for our panelists, please put in the Q&A. I am now going to pass it over to the lovely Barbara Ann Wright. Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone. Well, as the equally lovely Sandy said, welcome to Out of This World. I am Barbara Ann Wright. I'm an author and an editor for Bold Strokes Books, and I'm going to grill our fine panelists we've assembled today until we know all of their literary secrets, including whether or not they are bothering to wear clothing from the waist down during these troubling times. So, quick bios in no particular order. Karen Williams. Karen is a writer and a psychotherapist who divides her time between New York City and the Berkshires of Massachusetts. In addition to novels and short stories, she has published award-winning articles on nature, animals, and the human-animal bond. Her newest book, Coyote Blues, is due out in June. Jane Esther. Jane is currently stuck at home near Boston, sometimes enjoying the company of her wife and cats. I guess other times she doesn't enjoy them. Her newest book, Convergence, is the second and final chapter of the Portal series and due out in June. Jane Fletcher. Having escaped from London, Jane Fletcher lives with her wife in southwest England. An incurable daydreamer, her love of fantasy was sparked when, aged 7, she first encountered Greek mythology. Aw, me too. Her novels have won the GCLS and the Alice B. Reader Appreciation Awards. Her next book, Silver Ravens, will be out in July. Now I'm going to screw up her name, and I apologize in advance. Genevieve McCluer. I've made that last part Scottish. I don't know why. Genevieve has lived all over the United States, but currently lives in Arizona with her partner and cats. She loves mythology and uses that love as the basis for her stories. She wrote My Date with a Wendigo and has a forthcoming novel, Olivia. And last but certainly not least, Diana Jean. Diana is a 20-something who spends most of her day writing about people falling in love, reading about people falling in love, or making excessively frilly dresses. Oh, I wish that was said excessively making love. She also enjoys Disney, bubble baths, espresso, Star Trek, Harry Potter, fried chicken, pink, lavender, and Cabernet Sauvignon, which I probably also messed up the pronunciation of. Her newest novel, Tokyo Love, is available now. Okay, some questions for y'all to get right in it.
Okay.
What about? So I'm going to lump sci-fi, fantasy, horror, sport, paranormal, all into the umbrella of speculative fiction or spec fic. What about spec fic inspired you to write it, Jane Esther? And why did you pick it over every other genre?
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, everybody. So I think I'm sort of obsessed with the future. Like, if I could freeze my body right now and like do one of those cryogenic things and then wake up 300 years in the future, I would totally do that. So I'm just like, I always want to know like what's coming next technologically, in like human exploration and things like that. And so, yeah, I've always been interested mostly in spec fic, like grounded in science, rather than fantasy or, anything like that. But I definitely appreciate the imagination that goes into it.
Same question for you, Jane Fletcher. What do you say? What inspired you to write spec fic over every other genre?
Partly it's the fiction that I enjoy reading most, mainly science fiction. So it's a bit surprising that I tend to find myself writing more fantasy, and I'm not quite sure why that is. I would have assumed I'd be much more science fictionist. It's the potential to make stories the way I want them to go, to be able to create the background for not only to tell the story, but if I've got anything else that's bugging me or issues I want to throw in, I can actually craft the world to sort of throw that into, I can create conflict or I want to deal with. And that ability to go beyond just telling the story, to actually play around with ideas and possibilities, is what you can do in spec fic that you can't do in anything else.
Oh, awesome. I'm going to call you Jen because I screw up your name every time I see it. So tell us, Jen, what inspired you to write spec fic?
I guess, like it says in my bio, I've just always been obsessed with mythology and fantasy, and I love reading and learning about all of that and watching as well. Just, I don't know that it's necessarily the only thing I write, but it sure feels like it. And what I've always wanted to write.
Cool. Well, Diana, when you're not excessively making love, what inspires you to write spec fic?
I mean, I kind of like, because like my most recent novel is more like basically the very near future. So like some technological advances, some things that we haven't seen before, but otherwise a pretty familiar world. And I think that's the sort of genre I really like, where even if you have like a fantasy element or sci-fi element, something that is really familiar, it seems like it could be our world but isn't, and so I find that intriguing and entertaining.
Nice. Karen, did everybody steal your answer, or you have another one?
Well, Barbara, I think that I like spec fic because it's my first genre. It's it's the first genre we're ever introduced to, as little kids, being read to, or later when we can read, opening that first book. We're just invited into this magical world, inhabited by changelings and hobbits and elves that live in very cozy and well-appointed holes, and woodland witches that live in houses made out of candy, and just all sorts of things. And then, as if that's not enough, the adults in our lives actually lead us to believe that our world and these other worlds are constantly shifting and that they overlap. Hence, Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy that offers financial compensation for lost teeth, and on and on. And even the angels, otherwise appearing as winged fairies that come and escort our expired parakeets and hamsters as kids, and our dead goldfish to a place called heaven, which is quite magical. So, and then it just seems like all of a sudden, we're just informed that it's all a hoax. It's just pretend. Grow up, and we're expected to kind of leave our imaginations behind. And I just find it very sad. And so maybe it was, sort of a sense of nostalgia that made me want to go back and believe in the magic, and walk into the woods and exist in a place where these wonderful, enchanting worlds are constantly shifting.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And it's like, what happens to one's expired parakeets after you grow up? If they can no longer be escorted to heaven, they're just gone, and that's terrible.
Yeah, that's an awful thought, that we just stop existing.
Yeah.
Any of us, and any sentient being, that we should just no longer exist. And Barbara, I also think that certainly airplanes and cruise ships are modern day marvels for sure. But I've always said that the most underrated form of travel is the imagination. And, you don't have to leave home to do it. It's probably the safest means of travel right now in the middle of this awful pandemic,
Yeah.
But, all you need, forget costly plane tickets and dragging your luggage and your body all over the globe. All you need is an author and a reader, which, in my opinion, make the best travel companions. And just cozy up in a comfortable chair, and for the price of one book, you and your reader and her author can travel anywhere together.
I was about to say that we're more cost effective. So for that's for everyone out there. I've heard from a lot of you how inspiring you find speculative fiction and everything about it. And I would like to hear from you individually, what was the inspiration for the part of your stories that makes it speculative? So the tech, the myth, the magic, any kind of creature you use. And so I think I'm going to pick on Diana first for this one, because she went near the end last time.
Well, I guess to be specific, in my most recent novel, the really speculative part about it is I have a robot who is one of the main characters, and she is designed to be a companion, love robot, a partner to whoever she's owned by, sort of thing. And I guess what really inspired me with her is I sort of, like, I've played dating sims, I've programmed video games with my friends that are silly dating sims and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot too of these sort of like artificial companions that, you know, you're supposed to love or date or whatever, just play like a video game. You know, and so I wanted to take her even further than what we have in our modern day to something that's more intelligent, has more of a personality and more of a spirit. And so I found like a lot of things that I've done really inspires me to just like, what if I just turned it up a little more? What if I just pushed it a little more, you know, and maybe even gets a little uncanny or weird or disturbing, or even kind of lovely too. And so I like exploring that sort of side of taking something, you know, that I'm very familiar with and just like pushing it a little more extreme.
Nice. Jane Fletcher, what about you?
Okay, well, if I take one of my first series that published with Bold Strokes, the Solano series, there I use speculate as a rationale to get a women-only world, using nominal science background, you know, a lost planet. But it was fun having created a women-only world, so being female isn't an issue, being lesbian isn't an issue. There's a lot of women-only worlds in lesbian science fiction generally. And often I'll say, no, they're, you know, worlds inhabited by these, you know, tall Amazon vegetarians who are wise and everything else. And I've just met too many women I don't like to think that just getting rid of men is going to make, you know, everything perfect. So it was just fun to create a world that was women only, so that some things weren't issues, but then to, you know, to fill it with women much more like the women that I know. You know, who are, you know, you get some people who are power mad, some who aren't terribly nice, some who've got nasty habits, and just a set of stories in that world. And then sort of, you know, play around with the game with various other issues. Mm-hmm. I think that's answering the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was an awesome enough answer, so I'm going to take it. You get an A. Karen, let's hear from you.
Do you want to know about the book coming out or my most recent that is out?
Whatever you'd like to talk about. If you have a cool story about what inspired your spec fic.
Okay. Well, my most recent published book is As the Crow Flies, and I do consider, well, I do consider myself a romance writer, but I do paranormal romances. I guess I write urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy. As the Crow Flies is my first ghost story. It is a strong romance, but it was inspired by a lifelong, we were talking about, you know, just death before and where we go. And I think that since I was a child and later in college, a philosophy major and studying metaphysics, and more recently getting into trying to fathom in layman's terms as much as I can about quantum physics, which makes technology and this video conference even possible. But you know, as you get older, Barbara, and you experience more losses, you know, people you love, and our cats and dogs, and it just gets like harder and harder to wrap my head around. You know, just the idea that we're all here now, sentient, feeling, thinking, and that one day that's, you know, we don't exist anywhere. We're just lights out, we're gone, and I just can't accept that fact, you know. And so, you know, delving into quantum physics, as Einstein called it, spooky action at a distance, and said, if you think that you have any understanding of quantum physics and you aren't utterly shocked, then you don't understand it at all. It's bizarre, this invisible world that we live in. You know, our brains are just kind of equipped to process a three-dimensional reality, but there is so much we can't see. I mean, even this virus, you know, COVID, we refer to it as an enemy, you know, and that we're under attack, and we can't see the enemy because it's microscopic. But you know, beyond that, it's just a crazy world that, you know, seems very magical, and I guess it would be to someone who existed 200 years ago if we were to take our cell phones and computers and show them medical devices like MRIs and say that this is quantum physics. You know, we'd probably be accused of witchcraft and sorcery back then, you know. So anyway, that influenced me. There's just that whole idea of having to say goodbye to things we love, and trying to use concepts in quantum physics. For example, entanglement, which would explain how love at first sight might really be possible, or when you're thinking of someone and the phone rings, and it's that person, and so many other things, and ultimately existing scientifically, finding a reason why or how we could actually exist in a parallel dimension right alongside the ones we know, you know. So that influenced me, and I don't mean to push the book off as being very, you know, scientific or being a Debbie Downer and saying it's depressing and it's about death. You know, it's a lively, it's an intensely romantic, sexy romance, but it just hopefully will give readers food for thought, and you can walk away feeling actually good about what might wait beyond.
Now, Jen, I'm very familiar with your work, and full disclosure, I am Jen's editor, so haha, I get to read all her books first. So what inspired you to take all of these critters, I'm going to call them, these fiends, from every single, it seemed like, culture in the world, and just bring them all together?
Well, there's a lot of reason for it. Mostly just it's fun, and a lot of the stories I loved reading growing up did a lot of the same thing. But I guess my real reason is just that it allows me to play them all off of each other. You know, I can have these different interactions that I'm able to have in basically any other story. And like a lot of the reason why I like going with these various mythical creatures is that it allows me to explore more human issues in a more exaggerated sense. Like, most humans don't have hundreds of years of trauma that we have to deal with. Most humans' body issues don't tend to be quite as severe as in My Date with a Wendigo.
Yeah.
So almost it allows these fiends to be more human.
Nice. I like that perspective. So Jane Esther, have you forgotten the question?
Surprisingly not. Thank you for asking. So Uninvited, which is my latest one, and Convergence, which comes out in June, are part of a two-part series, the Portal series, and the idea for it kind of came from like a real local myth that folks who maybe live around upstate New York, like the Finger Lakes area, may be aware of, which is where I'm from. So there's this myth that under Seneca Lake, there are old nuclear warheads from, like, I don't know, I guess World War II it would have to be. And so there's a lot of stuff related to that. Like, there's a Navy base on the lake, and they do like sound testing, and that's real. People like get shuttled off the lake in their boats for like no reason. So a lot of like weird stuff happens there. So I decided to use that as the sort of background for my story, which in which basically the bottom of the lake is actually a portal to another universe. Essentially, sort of accidentally, they've sort of like sent out probes to different possible planets and universes to colonize. And one of them happens to be, you know, Seneca Lake in New York.
Whoops.
So, yeah. So one of the main characters gets sort of infected with alien energy and has to figure out what's going on. There is also an element of sort of dimensions in there. I'm really interested, like, as I think Karen was talking about, we are three-dimensional creatures. We see and experience the world in 3 dimensions, you know, but what if the fourth dimension, you know, it is time, but what if like another type of creature can actually move through time just like we move through space? And so that is also a big element. So there's like some sort of time travel related stuff. So a lot of it is sort of is really bound in physics as well, and kind of me hoping that life exists somewhere else and that there are multiple universes and things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I see a lot of intersection between everybody's answers there. So,
I just have to ask Jane, what is that behind you? I'm like, just, I always get distracted by, I love interiors and it's like wild. Is it a poster or a camera?
No, it's actually just outer space where I am. No, it's it's a virtual background. I'll teach you how to do it.
Oh, okay, great. Wow. I like it. It becomes you.
Me too, but my outer space is filled with books and Barbies. Anyway, let's take a question from the gallery. Have any of you ever had to create your own language? Anybody? Hands up. No. Okay.
Okay. Well, actually, can I just throw some? In the Shoestone, I was my background. I had, you know, there had been a previous empire, and there was like the common tongues from there, and I was doing the standard, you know, fantasy gobbledygook, you know, your best, you know, throwing some weird syllables together, and it suddenly occurred to me that after 800 years, it would sound rather like Old English. So in BSB, you're not the rule is, you know, you can't put any bits in from other languages unless you're really fluent in them. But I got special dispensation to actually put some Old English in, on the basis that no reader was ever going to know if I was actually getting the tenses wrong. So,
I think there's probably like one person out there who might do it, and you probably got a letter from them.
No, actually, probably one person else. Oh, and I got her to the news just to check through the. So yeah, I was going to invent, you know, just. Somebody just wanted to throw a sentence in of somebody talking, but rather than gobbledygook. So if anybody does read the Shoestone, any of the bits that come in the old Empire language, if you run them through an Old English translator, you will actually find out what they're saying. It's only about 10 sentences.
Yes, quick, everyone, put that on your to-do list. So that answers the panelist question. Hers was, how did you go about making up your own language? I've made up mine before. How did you go about doing so? Very, very badly. Very slipshod and not at all like Jane Fletcher. Okay, so another question from the gallery. When you've been writing for hours, how do you get back to the present? Let's pick on Jen first for this one.
I mean, what fun is it ever being in the present? Let's be fair.
True. So your question is you don't come back.
Yeah, I have definitely been caught up enough that it took me a while to get in my headspace before. I guess just time, really.
That's cool. Jane Fletcher, what about you?
It's actually more of an issue when I'm reading other people's work. You know, like reading like the Narnia Chronicles, and as a reader coming from that back to the real world. Whereas my fantasy worlds, they're mine, they're in my head, they're with me all the time. So there's never really a stepping out of it. It's other people who carry me away sometimes.
Jane, Esther, what about you?
Yeah, I would sort of agree with Jane Fletcher. I think about it more than the time I actually spend writing it. I think more the days that I can get after I've written for like a while. comes more from like just concentrating really hard at a task than anything else. But yeah, it's sort of like with you all the time. Yeah. Well put, Jane.
Karen.
I have a really hard time, when I'm there with characters, and you're in that world. Talk about like alternate realities. You're there. You're with them, and sometimes, I look at the clock and say, "Oh my God, I have to meet friends for dinner," and you stop and you get there, and I'm in a restaurant, and I'm still kind of thinking about scenes or new dialogue, and sometimes friends will look across like, "Karen, are you okay? Do you feel okay?" And it's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just, I'm just coming out of some, it's like a drug-induced, state.
And if you don't want to die in my next book, you leave me alone. Diana, how about you?
I mean, I guess my answer is sort of similar, where like when you've had a really intense session, you don't really get out of it, so to speak. So like, I mean, usually what I do is I just carry my phone around. And like, if I have to go do something else, or if I have work or something like that, I can at least, like, if I have another thought that's actually like, a good thought, I'll write it down on my phone and keep that with me. So then even though like I, am feeling like, oh, I'm wasting all this creative energy because I have real life things to do, at least I have that as some consolation prize.
That's true. Okay. Let's talk about what you're into right now for a little bit. Do you read or watch much speculative fiction? And if you do, what is your current favorite? Noting that your current favorite does not also need to be current. Let's start with Karen.
Well, I don't know if I have any favorites. I just colors or books or movies or whatever. I just like stuff. But being that I write urban fantasy, contemporary, and paranormal stuff, I guess anything that I like the most takes place in this realm. I'm an Earth sign, a Capricorn, feet on the ground, head in the clouds. So I love this planet. I love nature and animals, and I just don't want to leave it. So I prefer movies and books in which the magic is brought into this world, if that makes sense.
It does.
I can think of like even Miss Peregrine's House for Peculiar Children, great urban fantasy. Age of Adeline, wonderful, that even brings in a little science. And probably the very best is, and it really is urban fantasy and paranormal, is the Twilight Zone, and Rod Sterling's, even later he did Night Gallery, which was even better. Man, that was just wonderful stuff,
Yeah.
So it's always that juxtaposition of the ordinary and the extraordinary, just ordinary people living an ordinary life, and suddenly something magical happens, or some supernatural being, enters their world.
Cool. How about you, Jane Esther?
I'm currently very obsessed with Alex Garland stuff. You may know him from Ex Machina, Annihilation, and then most recently on Hulu, there's this show Devs, which was awesome, kind of mind-blowing. And if you start it now, you'll have all the episodes instead of having to wait for 8 weeks, which is really hard.
Yes, no kidding.
Yeah. But I love that, and I love Ted Chiang, the science fiction short story writer.
Yes.
I loved Arrival, the movie. That's sort of like the concept, the other concept for an invited, like what if Arrival happened in this other world. Yeah, I love it all. I can't get enough of it, especially if it has to do with like sort of tech.
Yeah. How about you, Jen?
Well, right now I'm actually reading Not Your Average Love Spell by you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm really enjoying it. And as for shows and other books, like I love Dresden Files and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Buffy and all the classic stuff. And well, I haven't actually watched the current season. I can't exactly not mention Supernatural when I have the tattoo.
Diana, how about you?
I mean, I guess recently, like I read so much YA novels. So I guess the most recent one I read that was speculative was Someday by David Levithan, which is a sequel to Everyday, which is a novel that I really, really like. So I was really excited to see the sequel. And it's one of those like really soft speculative, I would say. It's just more about like people and like kind of like that YA teenage life as well. So, but I mean, I think I liked it because it was very sort of, it was interesting. It had a lot of interesting things in it, but it was still very like relatable and down to earth in a lot of ways.
Jane Fletcher.
Well, having just sent off the the final edits on what will be my next book, I thought I'd give myself license to really play. And I've been dug out a couple of old computer games.
Oh.
And first off, it was Sky. I don't know if people are familiar games, but Skyrim. I mean, they're two of the great big classics.
Yes.
And obviously, Skyrim, you've got this huge open world. You can run around over mountains when you're stuck indoors. And I was playing that, and then I've been on to playing Dragon Age, one of the Dragon Age 2.
Oh, yeah,
And it's just interesting. And I probably say, look at it as a writer. The characters in Dragon Age are so much better than Skyrim, and just trying to work out what it is, why I actually care about the characters in Dragon Age in a way you just never do with anybody really in Skyrim. There's nobody actually, it never totally engages me. So as a writer, I'm always analysing, is it just the voice acting, is it the dialogue, is it the way the story's put together? Because if you do play Dragon Age, there's some incredible moral dilemmas there, and there's quite a few situations you're in, and there really is no good solution to it. And which side you pick, there's always consequences. So that's what I'm doing. Basically, I'm running around fantasy worlds on my computer, and somewhere in the back of my head is just processing the difference in characterization between what are two of the big classic fantasy computer games.
Awesome. Well, we're getting a lot of questions about sort of research and world building and that sort of thing. So I'm going to take one here that's how do you approach your world building? What world building elements are most important to convey your stories and the romances in your stories? So that is a big question. So who am I going to pick on first? I think I'm going to pick on Jane Fletcher because she's been asked this question before, I know, so that hopefully she has an answer.
World building, partly it's my hobby has been history. But basically, the more you know about everything, the more you can use to build a world. Even things like geology, like if you're going to have caves, you probably want limestone, which is going to be white stone. Everything else will filled into how you build your world. But equally, I construct a world a bit like I construct a character, and I'm plot driven. So what does the plot need? So, for example, in Wolfsbane Winter, I knew I needed a magic welding aristocracy. I needed mercenaries. I needed a lot of wild land with monsters in, and so I was initially constructing a fantasy world, and to hit the idea of hang on, and I don't think it's going to be a huge surprise to anybody who's read it, but it's actually post-apocalyptic the USA that I set it in, and the idea being that halfway through it, probably the readers will suddenly realise, now hang on, and one of my favourite bits, the chapter heading was, it's in the Court of the Dragon-Spawn King in LA, written ELAY. And at what point somebody would actually realise it really is Los Angeles, LA.
Spoilers. Just kidding. So Diana, when you were making your near future world, what sort of elements did you decide to build in there, things that you just had to have?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard because my world is basically Tokyo, Japan. So I had to, I visited there. I have a sister who's been living there for over 10 years. I've lived there for small periods of time. So it's like there's a lot of things I'm familiar with. And so for me, it was taking a lot of those things that are there that you can go and see that are real, as well as like just sort of like what might this look like in like 10 or 20 or 50 years, you know, what things would stay the same because they've stayed the same for hundreds of years, what things would be different because of the way they're like depending on technology or wanting to support technology. So, you know, there's certain districts in Tokyo that I kind of like amped up what would be there because of course they would have continued to develop. But then like I have places outside of Tokyo, like Nikko, that are going to be pretty much the same because they've been pretty much the same for like hundreds of years. So I feel like that was a lot of it to me, is like how much is going to be the same and then what is not. So it's, and then of course the stuff that is the same involves its own research, but less out of my own brain and more of actual looking at things and making sure it's accurate.
Jane, Esther, how was that for you? Because you also do a little bit of near future.
Yeah, I like to just kind of take the world as it is, kind of like Diana. And in the case of Uninvited and Convergence, they are contemporary, so they take place now. But I kind of wanted to just like mess one little thing up, which was like aliens coming over. So I guess it's like a big thing. Yeah, so I kind of love the idea of just like having it sort of normal, but there's something a little bit off. In my first book, The Universe Between Us, it's sort of a little bit like that. So nothing has changed really, except it's like 50 years in the future, and we're colonizing Mars. So like we're probably going to do that anyway. So I like a sort of like figuring out, yeah, like what are we going to look at? What is humanity going to be like in, you know, a few years, or kind of like, what is it like now? And what does that say about us?
Well, Jen, you also do, your books are set in present day. They're just turned on their ear a little bit. So how did you incorporate the real world with your world of themes?
Well, the real world part wasn't too hard. But for how the community center, basically I just I'm not even fully expressing a thought right now. Okay, so basically the themes all have this community center, which is the black market, and I just went about trying to think what all they would need there. And as the books go on, I've had more people and vendors and such show up to provide more basic services. Like in the second, well, it briefly mentioned in the first, and in Olivia, there is a veterinarian who works as a black market doctor, and in My Date with the Wendigo, they get a therapist. Just basic services that all of your angsty monsters need.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Karen, you're kind of in the same boat there, turning the real world on its ear.
Yeah, right. So yes, the world that saves you on a lot of research and thinking up, far off places and other worlds. But I guess even like Coyote Blues, which is coming out in June, is my first werewolf, or I should say were-coyote story, romance. So even though it takes place in the real world, the world looks different, to a human than it does to a coyote, or a wolf. So in that regard, probably more in looking at that world, I have to show a difference.
Cool.
How just how a coyote, versus a human navigates their environment and so forth. So it's a change of perspective.
Okay. Well, another question we've got here, how much research and outlining do you do before actually starting to write? And then where do you start with that research? Do you start with your world and build out? Where do you start with your characters? Do you start with your tech or your speculative fiction plot point? And let me pick on Diana for that one first.
I mean, I did a lot of research in the way of just trying to figure out like where I wanted things to happen at and sort of how I wanted them to happen. So like a lot of like writing out outlining for myself like that. But I mostly started with my characters. You know, I started with this concept of the robot, and I sort of built my way outwards of what exactly I wanted the role for her to fill, because like she's not really like the center of attention most of the time. You know, I have 2 other characters in this novel that take up most of it. So it's like, you know, she's like the sort of thing that started it all, but she's not really the main focus most of the time. So it's like, what did I want these other 2 characters to be? How did I want them to act as normal people around this? So yeah, for me, it was quite a bit of like just outlining it to myself on what the goals I wanted to reach were. And then as I went, I would discover like, oh, I should research this aspect more, or I need to confirm this part of Japanese culture more, you know, as it sort of arose. So like a little bit along the way as well.
All right. Jen, how about you?
Well, I usually start off with a somewhat decent idea of who the story is about, what's mostly going to happen in the general tone, and then I start writing about a quarter of the story, and so I've had a very natural flow for the beginning, just characters being characters, have the world introduced, know more of what I'm dealing with, and then I rather extensively outline the rest of the book.
Cool. Karen?
I do a lot of research, Barbara. You know, constantly, but I'm just like endlessly curious about everything. I mean, anything, you know? So when I get ideas, yeah, I just start with a lot of research, and, you know, decide what needs to be in the book or what does not. I will admit that perhaps on occasion, I do overwhelm a reader or 2 with too many fascinating facts. Or I've had someone say once, gee, do people really like have dinner and talk about antiques, and do they really know that much about philosophy, or do they really, you know, associate quantum physics with love? And it's like, yeah, you know, if you hang out with a bunch of professors and scientists and other types of friends, nerdy friends, yeah, that's what dinner conversation is like. And most of the conversations in my books are real. They've actually been conversations that I've had, as are the places, the restaurants, the towns. You know, everything is pretty much real. So yes, I enjoy researching, and even when it comes to magic, you know, I somehow like to at least offer some scientific explanation or some explanation for the magic itself, you know, just so it seems a little more plausible.
Well, speaking of magic and loving to research, Jane Fletcher, you are the queen of research. Please tell us where you begin.
Not especially queen of research. I mean, I plot. I mean, basically, I usually have an idea for a plot. I will sort of start with the plot and then and I said like, no, the world and all sorts of character. This is my plot, and then what sort of person would make the plot work? And if you decide that no human would ever actually act that way, they have to throw away and get a different plot. But equally, it's what world would this story work in? And something can be, sometimes I'll do research and things I don't. I remember once I was looking into how fast a boat would go down river, and I realised that really I needed like 5 days with people on the boat to get from here to here. So I had my map of the world, and I sort of rubbed out the river, and I do an extra big loop around. So okay, it's now long enough that it can take them 4 days.
I love that.
So I am doing research like that. Just like I know very little about horses. In fantasy, you've got a lot of horses.
Oh yes.
And so I did the research. How fast can a horse go a day, and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're fast horses, okay? Yeah, yeah. I've had this thing.
But also, my laughing at Isle of Broken Years. It starts off on this world at a real time. I think it's March 1631 on a boat out, and suddenly, my respect for historic novelists went through the roof. Just a number of questions, like how many masts are there on a galleon? Where do they put the chicken coop? Who was Pope in 1930? How on earth anybody wrote historical novels before the internet? I do not know. I mean, it was just so many details. When did they start putting sides on the, spectacles?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
it was just, So fortunately, the first third of the book, and then it go somewhere different so I could forget that sort of that detailed research. But I would always do just general ideas on.
Oh no, that's why I'm still crowning you the queen of research, and that's it. But no, I know before the internet, that's why it took writers of historical novels 10 years to write the next book in a series. So I'm gonna let Jane, Esther answer, and then I saw you with your hand up, Karen. I'll be right there. So Jane.
So I gotta say I did probably the most amount of research for my upcoming book because there are some sort of historical scenes. So that was completely different from anything that I have ever written. And a lot about religion too, which I know pretty much nothing about at all. But yeah, like as other folks said, I start with the characters and then kind of the plot builds around them. So I start with things that I don't have to do any research for, and I then am like, oh, this person should have this job. I should probably kind of know what that job is, which is sometimes more successful than others. But yeah, research is hard if you don't have like a person to talk to. And sometimes it's like really hard to figure out what a day in the life of a person who is like doing something specific with their life is about.
And if you're putting chicken coops on your ship, you just have to hope that no one asks where they go, because all right,
on the quarterdeck.
Well, see, Jane knows. That's who knows. So now we all know who to email relentlessly with our shipboard chicken coop questions.
Yeah.
Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to add, listening to the actual, footwork involved, but with Coyote Blues, I have had trail cams up. My property here in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, part of it is a core territory for the coyotes, and so I'm kind of protective of them and let them have that, and I'm happy to share the land, but I keep trail cam up constantly. Been up there at night, in a hoodie, sitting behind a huge boulder while they walk around me and until they notice me and take off. So yeah, that's been part of my research, is just being out in the woods and studying videotapes and so forth.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to ask all of these other questions that are piling on in. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I'm just going to ask everybody to real quick tell me what they're working on right now, and then I will tell our audience about our wonderful flash sale. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to pick you. Jane, Esther.
I'm on a break.
Okay, no one asked Jane for anything. Jane Fletcher.
I just finished sending off to my editor the final edits for what will be my next book out in July. So at the moment, I'm playing Dragon Age.
Okay, so don't ask both Janes. No more books for you right now. Jen.
Well, I just finished some edits for a book I'm about to send a proposal in, and I've been working on a Renaissance sci-fi story with a all-woman world. Like mentioned, that I'm also hopefully sending a proposal in for. And since I forgot to do some research last time, I am actually still getting scientific articles on medieval fishing because of how much research I've been doing for this.
Nice. Okay, well, I really much look forward to that one. Karen.
Well, I have Coyote Blues. It is due out, I believe, June 1st. And that is my Where Coyote story about a psychotherapist who was actually born a foundling on the Appalachian Trail and adopted by wealthy Manhattan parents, only to experience her first transformation after she first makes love with her childhood sweetheart at the age of 17. And anyway, but she goes on to become a psychotherapist. So think, werewolves, psychotherapy, and there's a little religion in there too.
She could work in Jen's world. Diana, your next project?
Unfortunately, right now, my night job is working at a hospital, so I don't have a lot of mental space to be writing anything new.
You can hang out with the Janes then. So everyone, right now we're having a flash sale now until 8 p.m., 20% off the most recent title of everybody in this panel right now, including yours truly. Use coupon code WORLD, capital WORLD. Info is in the Bold Strokes webinar chat, is on the Bold Strokes page, it's everywhere. Coming up next, I think we have Writing During the Pandemic, which is hosted by Radcliffe. So, you know, you ain't missing that. So hurry on over and register for that. And I would like to thank you, my lovely panelists, for being here today and for answering all my questions.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. Good seeing everyone.
Yeah, you too.
Good to see you.